What's up, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome back to the channel. Today is Wednesday, and that's a good thing because on Wednesdays I normally release my series Breaking Point. And today I have reached a breaking point with MLB, so we are going to break down what this proposal is all about and why it's so absurd. So I'm joined here with by agent Rachel Luba. And we're going to go into some of the laws and the rules and the legalities and the opinions and all that of this new proposal. So, to catch you up, the most recent thing we had heard was a 50-50 revenue split, along with some other things about postseason and player health and safety and all that from MLB. And so we are expecting an official proposal to be made, including the 50% rev split, from MLB to the MLBPA. That proposal, including the 50-50 rev split, was never actually made. Instead, the proposal that we got was actually this new, I don't even know, tiered system of player devaluation, I guess is probably the best way to term it. But Rich, you want to explain exactly what the system is?
Yeah, so definitely wasn't anything like the 50-50 rev split we were expecting. Basically, I guess Jeff Passan broke it down very well on Twitter, so it might be easiest to kind of just read his breakdown of it. But
to be clear, right before we jump into it, this is all based on like public knowledge, just stuff that's been put out in the public sphere, tweets from reporters, stuff that's been leaked through the media and all that stuff. This isn't about the official documents, as we haven't reviewed those documents, so this is just publicly available information. Go ahead.
The media, yeah. So the way it would work is, to start off, you guys agreed to the prorated salaries.
Yep, that was from the agreement back in March.
Correct. So take that prorated salary, and now if we assume that we're going to have 82 games rather than 162, so more or less your salary now cut in half. Mm-hmm. So now starting with that cut in half salary, you would be making based on this tiered system. So if you're making between 0 and 563,500, which is the league minimum, yep, you're paid at 90% on the dollar of that.
Of the prorated amount.
Of the prorated amount, correct. So
you get 90% of your 50%.
Yeah, so let's just go through to the tiers first.
Okay.
So you have the league minimum is paid at 90%. You have from league minimum to $1 million, you're paid at 72.5% on the dollar. From 1 million to 5 million, you're paid at 50% on the dollar. 5 million to 10 at 40%. 10 million to 20, you're paid at 30, and 20 and up, you're paid at 20% on the dollar. So Passan then goes and does two great examples. An easy one, which is you have a guy who's making the minimum. Mm-hmm. So the 563.5. He would be paid, his prorated amount is now 285,228. Yep. That's what he's getting on the prorated amount. Now, he will make 90% on the dollar of that, which means he will end up, at the end of the year, he will make $256,706.
Pre-tax.
Pre-tax.
Yeah.
Sure. All of them are. Now, we take kind of a harder, so now he explains Trout, who is, one of the highest.
The highest, I think.
The highest.
Yeah.
Is Cole on it?
Well, I guess it depends on the yearly amounts of the, I don't know, yeah.
I thought Cole had the higher AAV now. Not sure.
Highest for pitcher for sure. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
Not relevant.
Him or Trout are the highest. So Trout is making, for 2020, he's making $37.6 million. Okay? His prorated amount, so now he agreed to $19,065,000, basically, and some change. So now he would get $256,706 for his first 563.5 earned. And basically, Passan, again, if you want to read it, breaks it down more and how it's tiered. But from his original $37.6 million that he was guaranteed for the 2020 season, he will now finish only making $5.7 million.
So some quick math in my head says that's about 17%, 16, so yeah, between 15 and 20% of his original salary. So Trout's going to make let's just call it 20%. 20% of his original salary to play 50% of the games. So he's taking this huge pay cut.
So so Trout, the best player in the game, who was going to make $37 million. 37.6 will now make 5.7. He could, now there's a few additional playoff bonuses that he could make, but we don't even know if there'll be a playoff. And so, but I mean, I think it's just important to focus on the tiered kind of system.
Yeah, so if you were in the top tier of earners, you would make the amount of tier 1, the amount of tier 2, the amount of tier 3, and all the way up. But if you're in the lowest tier, you only make the amount guaranteed in tier 1. If you're in the second tier, you make 90% of the tier 1 money and 72.5 of the tier 2 money. Is that, yeah. So there's no way they actually think this is going to be accepted, right?
I don't think so. But to me, it's almost like it's brilliant in a way, right?
Yeah.
Because they started out, when they proposed this 50-50 rev split, you kind of saw all the players seem to be very united in, standing up and saying no to this. Then they come back, and when they
don't even submit that proposal. They just leak it to the media,
they just
right?
Leak it. And they gauge. They're smart. They gauge the sentiment. You hear the fan sentiment, and you also hear the players. And it seems like the players are very united on this. We're not going to accept a 50-50 rev share. So when they actually go to submit now an official proposal, it is completely different, and it's one that clearly is meant to divide players, because how could it not?
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah, so there's two outcomes to it, right? Either they submit this and the union either says yes or they say no. The yes is very simple to figure out. MLB gets massive reduction in salary across the board. And we'll get into some of the, who's getting the reduction in salary in a little bit. But if the union says yes to this, there's a massive reduction in salary, so the owners get a huge relief on the financial side. If the union says no to this, which is obviously what's going to happen, then the longer it plays out, the more you have the young guys in the league. This is what their intent, I believe what their intent is, that you have the younger guys in the league that are going to then be making not very much money, looking up at the top guys and saying, now why is it that you get your money and don't want to play or whatever, but then I don't get paid? And so it's meant to fraction the player group, because you're taking care of one side of it and then positioning those guys against the higher side of it. That seems to be the intent. As a negotiator, does that seem right to you?
I mean, it's a lot harder to negotiate against a very united front, against a group of people that are, sticking together and fighting for the same thing. But, when you are negotiating against a group of people or individuals that now are very fragmented and maybe, want different things, and they're fighting, again, we don't know that players necessarily are pinned up against one another yet, but it would appear just on the surface of what they're doing that's what it's meant to do. It's meant to divide the players.
I've spoken to a few different players in the last 24 hours and since this has come out, and players are very much united against this deal. So it's like the players are not fractioned at all about this. They're very united, but you can just see the intent behind it.
Right. It was meant to try to create,
dissension.
Yeah. And friction
player
between.
A doesn't like player B and has different views, and then you get infighting, and then you break up the united front that you were trying to go
you have
against.
guys that have already made a good amount of money, and now, guys that are struggling, that would be paid, the minimum, and now they're going to get paid really nothing, come on, I got to feed my family. You've already got millions in the bank saved up. Not everyone has that. Not all the players have that. So it seems like that was their intent.
This is so consistent with what MLB does. It's a short-term cash grab. And I guess I'll explain a little bit what I mean by that. They're worried about the bottom line this year, which is fair. Business owners aren't in business to take big losses. You're in business to make money, and baseball's business. I get that side of it. But the overall health of your industry also matters. And so when you do stuff like this, and the whole tactic of negotiating through the media and leaking stuff through the media, the intent is to put pressure on players to cave, public pressure, for them to take less and get out there and play. And we've heard a lot about it. Just take whatever they give you and get out there and play like you owe it to the country. People need baseball. We want baseball back. We need a distraction. We're going through tough times. A bunch of people are laid off right now. And those things are all true. But the act of negotiating through the media, all this stuff's going to have to go on behind closed doors anyway. They're going to have to sit down and talk and figure it out behind closed doors. The act of leaking this stuff to the media is to put public pressure from the fan base on the players, to position the players as the greedy ones that are trying to get all their money while everybody else is out of work, which isn't at all what's going on. We just want to be treated fairly. But then it's meant to position the fans against the players and get a little feud going on there. And now this most recent one is to position fans against players and players against players. That is terrible for the overall long-term health of the game. Like, the one thing that makes a fan, the reason people are fans is because they can look at on the field, they can look out there on a nightly basis and they can see a little piece of themselves in their favorite player. It might be a smile, it might be the way they hustle, it might be the story that they have, it might be that they're a practical jokester, but like, if I'm a fan of a certain player, it's because I see something in that player that I identify with. And I can create a human-to-human connection there. And then every time I watch that person play, I'm like, oh, that could be me. And it creates this aspirational feeling, I grew up going to Dodger games, and I would look out there on the field and be like, man, if I could just be one of those guys, because I could see like this guy hustled, and like I didn't like that guy because he didn't run hard, but I like this guy because he was kind of the underdog or whatever. I have my certain view of things and reasons that I become a fan. And so when you sit there and intentionally try to drive a wedge between your fan base and your players, and then with the other hand, you're saying, oh, we have a problem marketing the game. Baseball's not marketable. The stars aren't marketable. We can't market the game. Well, you're taking away the one thing that fans have an ability. The one thing fans cannot relate to players on is how much money they make. The vast majority of people don't make as much money as a big league ball player, regardless. League minimum guys all the way up to the Mike Trouts of the world, right? And so you're just sitting there driving a wedge between your fan base and your product because you're trying to do a short-term cash grab and save this year's bottom line. When what you could be doing is just...
You're missing the fact that you have potentially 4 months to be the only sport, live professional sport on TV.
Yeah, but we've missed that because golf's back, NASCAR's coming back, UFC, and these sports are making a big push. There's no team sports back yet.
Yeah.
But
they're making, think about the audience that you have. Think about normally during a normal year, who you're competing with to get attention and to get eyes on baseball. And you already have a younger generation that thinks baseball's boring. But what about when they're sitting at home right now and they really don't have any other option? You have an opportunity to put your sport in front of so many more eyes.
Yep.
And people are just desperate for any sport,
yep.
any sort of competition they want to see right now. They're hungry for it. And yet you're holding out, you're missing this opportunity to grow the game.
Which then creates future revenue for you, which players then aren't going to share in. And that's probably a good segue into, I could rant on this whole thing. What MLB should be doing right now is negotiating with the union about how we're going to mic players up. How are we going to put cameras in stadiums to give fans different angles? How are we going to get players to engage with fans? Are we going to do Zoom calls to take, put players on MLB channels so they reach the nationwide markets instead of just the local markets? Are we going to, they should be looking at creative ways to then grow the game, because ultimately if they grow the game and they grow the industry, they make their money back in the coming years. Instead, what they're doing is focusing on this year's bottom line, and they're going to lose a bunch of fans. They're going to lose the trust of the players. They're going to create bad blood between everybody. The fans, the players, the owner, everyone's going to be sniping at each other.
They're just missing so many opportunities to be putting their game out there in front of eyes.
It's so frustrating. I could rant on it forever, but it's probably a good segue into just the structure of baseball, and a lot of people, I came out, we had a video before, I said some things on Twitter, and the main thing was, well, if you don't like it, do what every other employee does. Go find a new job. Go take your
service elsewhere.
Yeah, go take your service elsewhere. But we can't do that.
It's a very unique, baseball has a very unique exemption carved out. And so unlike the normal traditional free market and the way that America was set up, and they have you know, congressional acts put in place to protect businesses and the free flow of business in America. Baseball is the one of the few industries really that has this exemption carved out, and it was.
So those are the antitrust.
These are the antitrust exemptions.
Yeah.
And so baseball has a very specific one, and it's funny. If you talk to any law student, you will learn about the baseball antitrust exemption. It's famous. It's the only one because you have the Sherman Antitrust Act, which was put in place to protect, basically, to allow a free market to occur and prevent big companies from monopolizing an industry, and then basically preventing, a capitalist market. It kind of started, I think, with like oil. We had one or two companies that were monopolizing it, and they were driving up the prices, and then no one can afford oil. And so this way, you have a capitalist market where you can have the smaller guy start his company, offer, at a lower rate, and the capitalist America.
Yeah, exactly.
Competition. Well, baseball, you can't do that. It's the only professional sport, by the way, that has this exemption. Football doesn't, basketball doesn't. And it's been upheld, I think 3 times at the Supreme Court level through various cases. The most recent, I believe, was Curt Flood's. What it does is baseball has this exemption because in 1922, I believe, when they first created it, the Supreme Court decided or upheld that baseball wasn't engaged in interstate commerce, because how they defined interstate commerce back then was it had to be you selling a product or a good. But at this time, even though they were playing games in other states, you had teams in one state playing in another, that would be interstate commerce you would think nowadays, but they weren't producing or selling a good, so it wasn't considered that. So
it's 100% interstate commerce now. If I have to pay taxes in those states,
so now, and people have hypothesized that if that original case was decided or brought to the Supreme Court 15 years later, this probably never would exist. But baseball's gotten to kind of ride off of this exemption for years to come now. So now, obviously with TV deals and everything, it is clearly interstate commerce. You have teams in all different states. And again, we could go really dive into this whole act, but basically what it does is it allows, you have the American League and the National League to more or less, they control baseball. There's no other baseball industry because when it first was decided,
MLB as an entity is the only baseball league allowed.
The reason it started was it was a little before 1922, in the teens, when there was another baseball, it was federal, I forget exactly, Federal Baseball Association or something. They wanted to start their own league, and they tried to hire away players. And there was this whole case filed, it was dropped, but then there was I believe a Baltimore team that pursued it and lost ultimately. And they now have this exemption where they do not have to abide by any of the Sherman Antitrust Law Acts.
Yeah, so once it got put in 1922, then that's basically just been, because there's now a precedent in the legal system, every time it gets challenged, it just says, oh, well.
They just wait for it. They're what they always defer to is that Congress has to create laws. Basically, if the Supreme Court were to decide on it, it would be this retroactive thing, and they don't want former players to be able to go back and file these lawsuits. So the Supreme Court's not there to make laws. They're just to rule on them. So they're waiting for Congress, and Congress has yet to change it. So for the time being, since 1922, we've had this antitrust exemption. And now what it gets down to is you guys can't go, there's no other possible league you could play in America. Whereas you have the NFL, what's the new
XFL.
The XFL, right? Because they don't have an antitrust exemption.
So no one, if I'm understanding you correctly, no one can even start up a competitive league, right?
You can go to a different country, but you have to post and all that stuff.
Right.
To go over.
Right. So if I wanted to, so even if baseball, let's say for example, I think the minor leagues are a great example because we just saw today that there's probably not going to be a minor league season, and that they're not going to pay them. But so if the minor leaguers wanted to say, okay, well, we're going to create our own kind of league, they couldn't even do that, right?
They can't even. I mean, they would be in breach if they were to basically forfeit their contract, and if they go play in Japan. And so this is. I'm going to read this section from this email that was David Force wrote it with the A's to all the minor leaguers when he informed them that they will not be paying $400 a week after May 31st, which I think totaled out to be, it was like $1 million it would cost the owner to pay players, pay minor leaguers at $400.
Yeah, for the remainder of the year at $400 a week.
So, and he's worth like $2 billion, but $1 million, and instead these guys who are living off of $400,
they're already making less than minimum wage.
Yeah, and here's the thing: they gotta stay ready. They can't, and so a lot of them, it's like they go work another job, they go find another job for a temporary period of time because this isn't their normal. They're not going to be around for years to come, hopefully, to be working that job. So it's going to be temporary. Find someone that hires them, but they still have to stay ready. They still have to train.
Yeah, because they could lift the restrictions, and then all of a sudden it's like, hey, you got a week to report to spring training.
Yes. So I guess this was the paragraph that I think is interesting that they wanted to remind players of, and it's. As a reminder, your UPC, which is your Uniform Player Contract, remains in place during the period of its suspension, and you are not permitted to perform services for any other club. The compensation provisions of your UPC will be reinstated under the terms of your contract upon the commissioner's decision to end your suspension. So what that means is they cannot they cannot take their services elsewhere. If in any other industry, if this happened, you can say, hey, you know what? I don't like how this industry or you're operating. I'm going to go take my services to somewhere else, to your competitor, because maybe they will pay me fairly. And now you've created competition, and so now you have two entities that are trying to be the best, like they're competing with each other.
A free, fair market.
Yeah. So players can't just go. They can suspend your contract, and you will not be paid, but you're beholden to them.
I can't go work.
You cannot go work anywhere.
In my profession.
In your profession, anywhere else.
So minor leaguers couldn't go play in the Mexican League, or they couldn't go play in Korea or Taiwan, or could they?
No. They would have to give it. Like, if you were to go play in Japan, you would forfeit. You wouldn't get your year of service.
Right. My contract would be voided. I wouldn't get service time. You would be in breach
of your contract.
So basically, what that would look like would be I would have to retire, right, and then go play elsewhere. But then there's certain leagues around the world that have an agreement with MLB that they won't take retired players to kind of cover this exact basis. So basically, minor leaguers, big leaguers, we're all beholden to MLB.
You don't have another option unless you just want to quit baseball altogether.
Right, and go work in a different industry.
Yeah.
I could go work at a McDonald's, or I could go work at Home Depot or something, but I can't go play baseball.
And look, this is something that you've devoted your life to training, in order to do this. You have this skill, just as, an engineer devotes, many years of his life to developing some skill. And if you just told him you can't be an engineer anymore, you got to go do something else, that's not so easy for everybody.
Yeah. And then, 25, 30 years old, something like that.
Yeah.
Who knows? Now you got to pick up a new skill. So I think that's a really important point to make because baseball controls our salary, and we have a certain collective bargaining agreement that we've agreed to, a certain set of rules that governs how we can be paid the longer we work, right? So the first 3 years, you're subject to league minimum. You have no negotiation power.
Right.
The team can pay you whatever.
They unilaterally decide for the first three. The next three, though, you can decide. You can negotiate
with your own team.
With your own team, but they own you.
But it's still super depressed relative to what you could make on the free market.
So the way baseball's set up, because of these antitrust exemptions, or this exemption that they have, is they more or less have their employees at this cost-controlled, really depressed value compared to what they would be worth on the free market, right? Not just relative to the general public, but to what they would be worth on the free market. They have this really cost-controlled, system, and then you have these like few years where you do get to go on the open market, and so you have guys like. That's why you have guys like Trout, who his second year, right, he won MVP. He would be paid the minimum, the major league minimum. I don't recall if the team, if the Angels unilaterally.
Aaron Judge is a great example.
He was paid the minimum.
Yeah, so he comes up, comes in second. Some people may argue now with things that have come to light that he should have won the MVP or it should be given to him de facto or whatever, but he gets paid the minimum. And if you look at MVP salaries, if you look at Trout, who's won MVPs, he's making, I think the tweet says 37
He's
this year.
He's at $37.6 million.
Right. So
year.
Aaron Judge plays for 500 and I think at the time he won it was like 540 or 545 was the minimum, but let's say 550. When his services might be actually worth 37, or maybe he's not quite Mike Trout, maybe 34.
Nowhere near the 500, the minimum. But that's how it's set up, is that you, for 6 years, the team decides how they're going to pay you more or less. Now, like Trout, they could offer you an extension, but you're beholden to the team. They decide what to do with you. And so now you have guys that happen to be Trout or anyone else who has a bigger contract or a free agent contract this year, who is going to take a massive pay cut just because they've put in, like, this is where.
This is like as simple as I can make it. You work for the first 3 years, you get paid the absolute minimum that your employer can pay you. You work for the next 3 years and you get paid a little bit more, but still nowhere close to market value. Now, after 6 years, you finally get to free agency, and now you're able to experience a free market, which, as we just talked about, isn't actually free, but as free as it gets in MLB. And so you get to make your money then. So a lot of these contracts that they're making, players are still underpaid relative to the overall value of their career. And so now you're going to penalize the guys that have put in their time, that have worked for
and that never
cost
got paid
control.
early on.
Yeah, that got for really reduced salaries relative, again, not reduced relative to the public, but reduced relative to baseball and what their services are worth in MLB. And now you're going to penalize those guys and give them, I think we figured 17% of their proposed salary.
Trout, instead of 37.6, you're going to give him $5 million, but he doesn't have he has a limited number, all these players in free agency and the free market, to make these what they're worth in baseball. And guys that happen to be in that part of the market that are now in these limited years, that they have an opportunity to make more along the lines of what they're actually worth in the baseball market, are going to take huge hits, like millions of dollars, versus, over 30 million Trout is going to take, versus a guy, these guys who are making the minimum, who are going to lose, maybe $20,000.
Right, and I think that's a great segue too. You have a lot of good segues tonight.
Thanks.
I think it's a really good segue into something that you mentioned earlier. You mentioned that capitalism can take effect, and that's the antitrust laws are not allowing for capitalism to take effect. And so this proposal seems very socialist in a way, right? You're going to tax the rich, and the rich are going to give more to help support the young guys. Passon had a tweet that said something like the idea of the players making more, giving up more to help the younger guys.
The smaller guys. It's not inherently wrong.
Right.
It doesn't seem bad.
But that's not even what's going on here.
That's what I think is interesting, is that people are forgetting it's not a true, like, hey, we're the bigger guys, we're making more, we're going to help the little guys.
Yeah.
Because let's break it down and actually think about who is that money, the money that we're giving back, right? In a country, when you tax the rich more, we're giving it to the government. The government, in turn, is using that money to help the poor,
That's the idea.
those with less. So in this scenario, we are taxing guys like Trout, who draw in all these fans so that these teams can make money. And who's really getting the benefit here? It's not the little guys, those players that are making $550,000. It is The teams. The
It's
teams are the one. The owners are the ones who are getting this benefit. And now
we're taxing the rich to give to the super rich.
Yeah. And so now we're going to help by taxing the wealthiest, the highest paid players. It's going to give a monetary relief to the teams. Well, guess which teams are going to get the biggest monetary
teams with the biggest payroll.
So
of course.
Let's say so now who are the 3 teams that Trout and Cole and whoever the other highest paid players this year are going to really help?
Yeah, so you think of the traditional big markets. You're going to go with New
helping
York, the
number
Bostons, the Dodgers, the Cubs.
Yeah, so you have Yankees.
Makes sense.
Are going to have the biggest.
They're going to get the biggest
relief
benefit
from this. So we're helping the Yankees, the biggest market team. Then next we're helping the Dodgers, the second biggest market team with the second highest payroll. Guess who's third? We're helping the Astros, the Houston Astros, who have the third highest payroll. That's who we're helping. And then I think the Cubs are next. So they're trying to make it sound like, these guys, the players that are making the most are really helping the little guys. No, they're not. They're taking that money. The little guys are still hurt too. Even $20,000 for these guys to lose is still, they feel it. Just like Trout's going to feel losing $32 million.
Yeah.
And guess who we're saving that money for? We're saving it to help the Yankees, to help the Dodgers, to help the Astros.
Yeah.
Those are the guys that are getting the biggest relief from this because ultimately it's the guys with the biggest payroll.
Yeah.
Like, how about we just, tax the guys with the biggest revenue like the Yankees the most and maybe give it to the Orioles. Owners don't like that.
Yeah, they never like that. How about we just pay the players what was agreed upon, which is the prorated amount. You play 82 games, you get paid 82 games worth of your salary. How about we just do that? And then we can negotiate about the player health and safety issues. We can negotiate about miking players up and creating content and engaging the fans. We can negotiate about all that different stuff. And we can try to grow the game and work together in that area. And we can just pay the players based on what was already agreed upon. How about we just do that?
Yeah.
That seems fair to me.
Or, look, come up with a better, players are taking the risk. There's going to be risks now. Pay them a prorated amount. I think they'd be good to just go with that, take some risks, bring baseball back, pay them a prorated amount, and guess what? Be the only professional team sport for the next few months. Grow your game, and who knows what your revenue is going to look like next year? Who knows what kind of advertising opportunities you might get right now because so many more eyes would be on baseball. Mm-hmm. But instead, you're gonna alienate your fan base. You're gonna the players sure as hell don't want to work with MLB right now.
Yeah, it's short-sighted. It's a short-term cash grab. They want to protect the bottom line this year. Again, just not looking at the future of it at all. And they don't want this. Like, I can't imagine they even think that this is going to be accepted. So just the mere act of submitting it is just delaying the potential start of season like more and more by just doing this dumb negotiate through the public, put pressure on the players, make the fans hate the players, make the players hate the players, whatever their goals are here, instead of focusing on what's actually important, which is let's figure out the health and safety stuff, let's pay the players a fair amount, let's treat people fairly, and let's get baseball back on television for the millions of people out there.
I understand. I guess just as a lawyer, like the strategy of, if this was a CBA negotiation and the tactics and the strategy, because it's a long-term agreement that, that has lasting impact on the game. But this is, an unusual circumstance that nobody was anticipating, and it really it doesn't need to have any sort of lasting impact after this season on the game. Like, let's just negotiate in good faith and, not try to screw one side or the other, and just get baseball back and make it through this season. And then,
Meanwhile, on the heels of this news, you have hockey, who seems to be working together, and they've agreed to do a 24 team playoff and extend this out and get hockey back. And And playoff hockey is super interesting to everybody, and they realize that. And hockey is going to beat baseball back, it seems like, and then be the only sport on TV. And hockey is going to see a massive boom in their fan base because everyone's going to be watching playoff hockey, and playoff hockey is awesome. It's one of my favorite things. So I'm excited for that, at least. And
we have hockey to look forward to.
Yeah, I wish it was baseball that we had to look forward to, but it's been a discouraging day, that's for sure. But that's it. That's today. That's Wednesday. That's the breaking point. I've reached my breaking point, boiling point, whatever you want to call it. And hopefully you guys learned something. Leave us your comments down below. If you have any questions, feel free to ask those in the comments. Let us know your thoughts. And hopefully we'll be having baseball back soon. I'd like to have some new at-bats to break down on Wednesdays, but for right now, it's just breaking down stupid proposals. So see you guys in the next one.